All right. Good morning, everybody. It's April 8th, 2025. This is the Legal and Justice Systems Committee of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. I'm going to go ahead and begin with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people, who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect, connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. All right, thank you everybody for joining. The first topic on our agenda is the Justice Project Implementation Plan Committee Work Plans that was held from January. So we're going to be discussing some of the stuff that was in the packet that came through. What are 2 to 3 things that you want to achieve? Research best practices, develop policy recommendation, community engagement, cross-sector conversation. What is our timeline, 6 to 12 to 18 month, and when would we be able to share our work with the entire task force? So that is the one thing. And then the other item on the agenda that kind of ties into some of our goals is identifying data questions that need to be answered. And that is something Bertie is prepared to speak about. So I don't know if maybe we should actually start with Bertie and then circle back to the implementation plan to see what kind of data we have to work with and get some information from Bertie. So if you want to take it away, Bertie.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So I think you all in the packet got a second copy of the original policy goals and data handout that we developed starting with the committee some time ago, and then we added to it at our discussion 2 months ago. So we have that to refer to. Before I do, though, Julia Garrett, who is the consultant from Village Reach, did a presentation to our index committee last Thursday, and she has come up with 4 recommended outcome measures for the Justice Implementation Project. And I'd like to review that briefly today because I think that will help inform our thinking. So Jill has her summary slide for me there. Thank you. And what she has done is taken the all the 15 steps of the implementation plan and divided them into the 5 groups that we had originally, and then come up with these recommended outcome measures. One is the number of jail bookings. One is the average length of jail stay. The third is the number of people on release from jail that are connected to care in some fashion. And the fourth is obviously the recidivism rate. And then it's important to disaggregate those results by people with behavioral health and substance abuse issues, and then by race and ethnicity. The reason for this being important to our committee is today, I think, is that this will almost certainly be the framework around which energy is being used throughout the task force to guide our data requests and our conversations about data. There is a lot of conversations that need to be had. And that doesn't mean that our individual committee, the Legal and Justice Committee, can't take these measures and dive deeper in order to help the work that we choose to do. So I really want to emphasize this is not exclusionary, but I think it's a useful framework. So the additional things I will say about this overall work is that there's some really important conversations that need to grow out of this. And some of them I think are particularly pertinent to the current subcommittee here. And one of them is, how do we want to define recidivism? So that is obviously one of the major goals of the Justice Implementation Plan, but it can be defined in many different ways, from any interaction with the law enforcement system. So literally, if a person gets a parking ticket or stopped for some minor driving infraction, that could count, all the way down or up the spectrum to just those people who are rebooked into jail. So I want to put that out there because I think the members of this committee are very important in determining how we choose as a community to define recidivism. Looking in other municipalities and places, there's a whole variety of different definitions. So it's definitely up to us to decide what's important to us. And the second issue, which is not quite as directly related to this committee, but is equally important, is how are we going to define serious mental illness? And substance abuse is a little more easily defined, but serious mental illness is another discussion that is going to be important for us to undertake. And then, of course, how do we define connections to care? Because there's a myriad of types of connections when someone is released from jail. So those are the big conversations awaiting us. And that's the most important thing I just wanted to frame for us. When we go back and look at the types of measures from our previous committee discussion 2 months ago, we had these things in there. We had a discussion about the recidivism, and we wanted it divided more specifically by participation in different programs so that we could get more informed on the value of the different programs. And so I think that's an example of things that this committee may want to continue to pursue. So I'm going to stop there for a minute and see if there's any comments or questions.
Caleb.
I just wanted to point out that the discussion around recidivism is an important one to consider because there's more than one metric that a person could use. And depending on which metric you use, for example, a recidivism event could be that a person who was released from custody had a future interaction with law enforcement that resulted in arrest or resulted in booking into custody or resulted in a conviction. So there's multiple layers to which we can count as a recidivism event. And we want to be clear about what it is that we're tracking. Some of those things are harder to delineate just purely looking at the jail system. And so it's important for us to understand what we're trying to measure and how we go about measuring those things so that the data is as accurate as possible.
To continue on to that conversation on the recidivism, I don't know if you want to discuss civil infractions like a speeding ticket or expired tabs if you're looking to define recidivism. But I know a lot of times when there's pretrial cases pending, the judge will say you cannot be charged with any new crimes while you're released from custody. So, and typically when they're saying you cannot be charged with a new crime, they're looking at a criminal act, not necessarily a speeding ticket. I mean, they could define that in a pretrial order, but they're like, you can't get any more criminal charges. Doesn't mean it's a conviction, just a criminal charge. So does this committee want to look at just additional criminal charges, or do they want to look at additional convictions? And is that a question for the whole task force, or is that a question that the index committee is looking for information from the Legal and Justice Committee?
I think it's bigger than the index committee. And my sense is the decision will be made, I imagine it will ultimately be recommendations from the entire task force. But I think it's very important that we broaden the discussion as much as we can, because it's the community that voted for the implementation plan, and it's the community that said we want it monitored and evidence-based data to inform us. And so we need to keep that in mind. That's the only thing I'd add.
Caleb?
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So the way I'm answering this question is twofold. The first part is we need to be able to answer recidivism in the best way we can right now. And we also need to get better at it. So the answer that we can get a hold of right now is what information we keep in our current jail system in terms of who has been booked after having a release date within a period of time, right? That is a question that we can answer. And so that is the endeavor that we're taking on with IT support and the county. Recognizing that that doesn't encompass all aspects of the question, because we will not have data from other communities. We will not have data from other justice systems outside of Whatcom County. But we should be able to move towards a place where we're capturing data along each point and have it be more of an aggregate understanding of recidivism rather than just a simple, hey, has somebody been reincarcerated since they were released, given a period of time? So that's the first step for me, because we can actually do that, and then working towards a better goal of having more complete information regarding recidivism.
Thank you. Stephen?
I'm surprised that there are so many definitions of recidivism, and somehow that doesn't seem right to me. Since we're following best practices, are there not some better programs or common understandings in the research field for what that means? It certainly, to me, doesn't mean a civil infraction. And so I guess I'd ask if you, Bertie, have done any digging like that, which I think could inform the question. Secondly, I really appreciate your reference to the people who voted for the initiative. I think the layperson's understanding of this was someone who had been involved with the correctional system, was out and receiving support services, and somehow got re-involved in it. To me, re-involved could mean, as Caleb said, face charges. I mean, somebody thought there was probable cause to charge the person. And so I think either that or actual booking into jail would be an indication that there was a big enough slip up that our community connections, our treatment connections had not succeeded. And I think that's really what people in the community are looking for. So either one of those, and maybe we don't call it one thing, recidivism, we call it charges and reincarceration. Because you could have a charge for 9 months and then be acquitted of
Right.
that charge. And that's a significant fact also. So we might want to know that there was enough there to charge you, and we might want to know that you weren't convicted because there wasn't enough to convict you. Nonetheless, we also know that you came close enough that the treatment hadn't really resolved the underlying issues as well. And I'm sorry to take so long to articulate that, but.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, before we go any further, I want to go back to Bertie, but if you speak again, can we have you speak up just a little bit? We can hear you, but it's soft. Thank you. Bertie?
Well, just to respond, I will go back and look at measures for justice, but from the different readings that I have done, this issue was brought up, that how do you choose to define recidivism? So I think Julia's coming from that basis that there is no uniform agreed upon decision. And then, of course, the other issue too is, what are we going to call a recidivism rate? What is the timeline we're going to use? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? And that's another issue for us to think about. I know that when folks went to Seattle recently and investigated the housing program that they are now having down there, they made the point that even 6 months without recidivism can be a very significant point of progress for some of the subpopulations. So to keep that in mind as one looks at the recidivism rate. And my personal hope is that we may be able to have it delineated, like this is our 6 month, this is our 1 year, this is our longer rate. But that's another important factor to keep in mind in the discussion.
Bertie, when you're discussing recidivism rates, I sometimes think of like some of the therapeutic courts and how they're measuring their recidivism rate. Is it from the beginning of them entering into like a recovery court, or if it's a veterans court, that they actually make it through the 1 year program and that they've completed it without any new charges? I know Spokane and veteran courts, I believe 90% of those who start the program make it to graduation day, which means there's a very low recidivism for veterans court.
Right.
And you can look at that through therapeutic courts from the beginning of time to the end of it. Or are you really looking at how many people that have been in some program, whether it's lead or a therapeutic court, are actually successfully completing the program without reoffending? Stephen? Now I can't hear you at all. You're muted.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Tell me if this is a better volume.
Perfect.
Okay, good. I would think that in the time question, we want to also look at not, as Raylene said, maybe who hasn't recidivated during their tenure in recovery court, say, but rather we want to look at the people that we think have succeeded in that diversion or treatment and yet still recidivate, because that's an evaluative point for how well that program is serving community interests. So it ought to extend beyond successful completion of the diversion or the treatment or whatever. And back to the question of best practices, I have no basis for disputing Julia's sense that there are many working definitions. but we are looking at several models and we're modeling all sorts of our planning after them. So I would first look to them. Nashville must have a definition of recidivism. Columbus must have, you know, the LINK program. So how do they define those terms? How do they incorporate those in their data and evaluation pieces of their reforms? Would be questions I would have.
Stephanie?
I think the other thing that comes to my mind when we're talking about recidivism is, you know, if someone does reoffend, what is that? Is there harm reduction? Were they offending against people and now they have a low level theft charge? Because that's a very different narrative depending on how you want to use the information, and even at looking at effectiveness of services. And so I think that some of it is, yes, you capture if there was a reoffense, and within that, we also measure these other things because you can use data to tell whatever story you want, but they also tell a narrative that really helps you look at what's working, what isn't working. And I think that I have found doing some of the juvenile stuff that we come back to that question that is harder to measure.
Agreed. Bertie?
Yes, and I think that I think there's two levels of discussion. And so the one level is the large discussion of how we're going to define recidivism, but I don't want to steer this committee away from the more detailed discussions that we were having 2 months ago, because from the perspective of this committee and the different programs we're trying, I think we're going to want to have more detailed measures that may not be the big overall community for measures that Village Reach is working on. But I know that the discussion we had last time, there was a big discussion about, we want to know what happens when people are released pre-trial and how many of those re-offend before they get back. And, you know, there's a variety of interventions that are done in the court process that I suspect we're going to want to have data about in order to inform us if they're working or not. So I don't want to take away from that discussion.
Thank you, Bertie. Stephen?
I know I've missed some recent discussions in this committee and the joint committee, but I just want to go back to, we've been talking about recidivism, but the chart that Jill posted that I can't see anymore seemed to have a big heading, reducing inequities and disparities. And yet in the 4 quadrants, I didn't see anything about that, anything that would relate to inequities and disparities. And so I'm not quite sure how that chart reflected what it said it was reflecting, which seems even more important to me than the recidivism question.
Thank you. Bertie?
Yes, that's the, it may not have been evident in that chart, but on the side, there were 2 arrows, and the request is to take all of the outcome data and then report it out separately by race and ethnicity, and report it out separately by behavioral health issues and substance abuse issues, so that we can see that. And there's, as you know, Stephen, multiple other ways of looking at inequities, but those were the major categories that she is proposing to. And this is not decided, obviously.
Thank you. So Bertie, the thing that I think, if we're looking at the definition of recidivism and how we're measuring it, we need to look at it in 2 different aspects. One is recidivism rates on individuals that have entered into some type of program, whether it be a therapeutic court or a diversion program, and if that is working to keep people from being reincarcerated. And then the second one would be individuals that have been booked and released and were not in any programs per se, and what that looks like. And I think the comparisons are a little bit different because of restrictions being relaxed recently compared to what they were before. I mean, I can look at an individual that has 88 cases, and he had a bunch of cases where he was booked in on June 1st of 2023. He's still incarcerated, but he got out, and in between that time he accrued at least 3 more cause numbers with multiple offenses, and that's just a little tiny portion of it. It doesn't look like there was any other diversion or treatment programs. And so I think those are some of the things we want to look at, because when they do get released and they're on felony charges, what we a lot of times see is when they get reincarcerated, that's when we're ending up having to switch attorneys. And as we switch attorneys, that lengthens the amount of time, because the defense attorneys are starting over. So that individual may have started with the public defender's office, was released, and then reoffended. And when they reoffended, some of the victims were already being represented by the county public defender's office. So then we had to find a new attorney to represent them on the cases that were initially charged. So those cases started over. And so that lengthens the amount of time that somebody is actually being held in custody, or they're able to have their cases resolved. And so I think those are some things that need to be looked at as you're trying to determine recidivism, because if somebody's case is actually being resolved quicker, which isn't always possible, then when they do reoffend, what would have happened if we would have gotten that case to trial sooner? That happened in 2022. And now we're sitting here in 2025, 3 years later, and we've now accumulated cases from 2019, 2022, 2023, and it just kind of, it backlogs the system. And so looking at people that have been incarcerated, and I think I sent an email off earlier today, so I know it's going to take some time, but to look at how many people are still sitting in the jail that have serious criminal offenses, and how long have they been there, and how many cases, and how old are those cases. So if we look for cases older than 2 years that are still incarcerated, and what is the reason that those people are still there? Were they released, and did they pick up more charges? And silence. Birdie?
One of the things I would say when you look at data, I mean, that would really be the work of this committee or whoever is working on the goal of improving the efficiency and systems of our court system, because all of that requires much more detailed data in order to find out what the causes are and whether you're having an impact. So I don't want to derail us too much with the sort of overall community goals, which are important, but if you're trying to get in and work to make things better, we're going to be looking at a lot of more specific data. And I think this may reflect back on the first conversation on the agenda, which is, what are the areas that this committee wants to work on the most, and what would the work plan be for the next 6 to 9 months, because that would inform the specific data questions that we would want to use to help us with that, if that makes sense.
It does, Bertie, and I think that's why I wanted to kind of start with you and then work backwards to what is it that we think we can achieve? What do we want to achieve? And what is our timeline? And I think some of that has to do with, you know, Stephanie and I talk quite a bit about all of these wonderful programs that we think would be beneficial, but we've got to have the staff and the funding to do all of these programs. And we find ourselves stretched really thin to try to accomplish all of these wonderful things that we can do. But I guess we need to look back at, is there something that we can actually accomplish? And I know I met with Maya and some of the commissioners and Eric Ritchie. I don't know, it's been about 3 weeks now, Maya, maybe something like that, about can we eliminate people having to come back to court, excuse me, for warrant ID hearings. When they come in, they get booked on a warrant, and then can't we just set those hearings right away? Is that going to make a difference? Is that something we can measure? We started it. It seems to be helping a little bit, but how to measure that is going to be a difficult process. So I think sometimes we need to start little and with stuff that is actually realistic before we can implement the big stuff. Frog and throat. So if we go back to the Justice Project Implementation Plan, in the first graph, there was number 3 and number 5. Number 3 was strengthen and evaluate diversion programs. Justice involved individuals' behavioral health, substance use disorders, focusing on improving outcomes, reducing recidivism, and providing alternatives to incarceration. So out of that, is there anything in those areas that we think that we could accomplish or would like to try to accomplish before I move to section 5? I hear silence. Maya, you just went to the, was down in Seattle. Was it Link?
Yes, we did go. What was the question?
Is that something that you think would be beneficial here? Is that something we could actually do?
I think the group that attended that in our follow-up meeting decided that without a housing component, we couldn't really execute a link model. And there is I don't know if there's been like an official update on the True Blood housing funding that we applied for but don't have yet, or we got, but then something fell through and I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I think ideally, I think it was the consensus was that without that, without the housing component, we couldn't move forward. Caleb was there too. Caleb, I think, do you agree with that assessment? Yeah, I see nodding. I think we're kind of we can't do that model without the housing.
So I'm going to move to the number 5.
Caleb has his hand.
Thanks, Caleb.
Yeah, just so everybody's on the same page, the link model comes with 2 forms of housing. There's a respite housing, and then there's temporary supportive housing, and both of those would need to be in place in order for the function of link to be effective in our community. It seems to be a great model. I don't think that there was anybody who went down that thought it would not work for our community, other than the fact that we do not have those housing components in place right now.
So it's not something we want to say we could possibly look more towards that if we could figure out how to find the housing component.
Yeah, if that was answered, we would be able to look to see if that was a more effective model for us. It's a very specific cross-section of our justice involved population. But there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't work for our community. We just have to have that particular question answered first.
Okay. Stephen?
Yeah, this brings up something I've been wrestling with for a long time. We are tailoring the scope of our questions to what we think we can do in the short term. And yet Kayla and Executive Sidhu and others have been saying, give us policy level recommendations. And part of me really wants to say, this is what we need to do. County government figure out a way to get it done. So if we are too short-term and too focused on our data questions, we might not build a data system that's capable 5 years down the road of expanding to more questions that we really want to get to, but we couldn't do in the first 6 or 12 months. Similarly, almost everything we want to do depends on the availability of housing. So to say, well, we can't do this, so we're going to put that to the side because we don't have housing in the foreseeable future seems, I understand that, but on the other hand, nobody's saying forcefully, God damn it, we need housing. We can't do this other stuff. So the whole picture of what we need includes housing. And so I don't know, one of them is not very realistic in the short term, the other is not very realistic in the long term. And I don't know how we thread that needle in just the right way, but it seems like a challenge that we haven't yet really even picked up on in these many discussions we have.
So it seems like we need to bridge the gap between what we'd like to see, what we think it could do for our county, and how we accomplish the end goal with the missing piece that we don't have funding or we don't have the resources to be able to accomplish that. And is there somewhere that we could get those resources to get the housing that we need?
Yes, and the first thing is just to say it out loud to the powers that be, that these are the things we need, A, B, C, and D. And D is a long range thing. We can get A in the next 6 months, but let's not forget about the whole range of stuff.
I think that the reason that the True Blood funding we got the grant, the judge approved it, but we couldn't follow through on it because the partner agency, Lake Whatcom Treatment Center, was unable to fulfill their part of it. So yeah, I don't know that I've been in a meeting where this has been fully explained by the exec's office yet, like what happened and what sort of the future plan is, or has anyone been in a meeting where this has been announced or discussed? Because we got emails from Kayla saying, we got the True Blood grant, yay, but I haven't heard any, like, anyway, no one has been, okay, so I mean, I don't feel like I've had official explanation of it, so it's hard. I don't know. I feel a bit at a loss, sorry.
So can we ask Kayla to present about the True Blood grant and say, hey, these are some ideas that we have that we don't know how we're going to move forward it because we don't have this, but we need to know what the direction is from the exec's office, if there is funding from the True Blood grant that could be used towards this, or is there other areas that we could look at, policies, lobbying, formatting to try to move forward on this. Okay, and then we should have a little bit more of a presentation on what you guys actually saw, what if they have recidivism rates, how they measure their recidivism rates in the program that is actually currently being done elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that someone was supposed to be sending those figure, like numbers and the budget and stuff like that, because we didn't have any of the supporting data around it. We just visited. So I'm not sure. I think Melora organized it. I don't know if she was the point where that data was going.
Okay, so we would want to check with Kayla on the True Blood stuff, and then Melora on data and documentation from the visit that you guys had in Seattle. Well, thank you. We now have a topic for our next meeting. And I think we also have something that we can move forward, that we can show that we have a goal to help strengthen and evaluate some of the diversion programs. I think we have to look at other diversion areas and what we want to do, whether it's programs like that or LEAD, or if we want to look at therapeutic courts, or if we want to do both. So I think we want to come up with a list of different diversion and alternatives to incarceration. Just to
No.
continue to look at
I
number
have a
3.
question, just I just about duplication of work, because Brian Estes is emailing me. We're setting up small work groups to talk about diversion and reentry. I just don't know. The map of the IPRTF is a little confusing to me. I'm not sure how, where, I just don't want to see duplication of work and forming of work groups and committees that are like, we're doing the same thing in 2 spaces. So can anyone?
Maybe that's
Marty-
something Jill can help us on. I think a lot of times Stephanie and I feel like we are going to a lot of different meetings and committees that we see a lot of overlap. And that's where, when we look at our legal and justice subcommittee, is it overlapping with the behavioral health? Should it be at a joint meeting, or should it be at the IPTRF?
Yeah, or
as a whole?
Heather, somebody who's got a bigger picture view of what these, go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, if you look at that, or I can screen share it, in your packet, the roles and responsibilities. Item 3 is strengthen and evaluate diversion programs for justice involved individuals. That item is assigned to both the Legal and Justice and Behavioral Health Committee. And so that's why you're seeing that overlap there, Maya. And I think that's why you had volunteered to be on a part of, or to be on Brian's work group, is to sort of represent this committee there.
Mhm.
So I think if that's that separate work group, and then we come back and present to the joint behavioral health and legal and justice, we just had one last month. So the next joint one, if we have information at that one on different programs, that would tie in. But if we have other areas from legal and justice that we want to make sure that we're including behavioral health, we would want to provide that direction. Unless I'm missing something.
Jill, when is the next joint meeting, if you don't mind?
It's in June.
June?
And we're meeting, the work group is meeting for the first time April 21st.
Correct.
So I guess if there's more input that we need from legal and justice, we would want to know at the next May meeting. And if we schedule some of that May meeting to include Melora and Kayla and discuss the Seattle thing, I think that's a start. And then we might have some overlap when we get to the June meeting. I'm gonna move on to number 5 on the goals. This one includes legal and justice, pretrial work group, and JPOP. And that one is to implement court reforms to reduce incarceration rates, decrease pretrial detention, increase case resolution efficiency, and expand alternatives to bail for more equitable outcomes. I think some of that actually includes index and data collection. I know Peter asked me a while back about warrants, and I was able to provide some data to him in November of 2024 on warrants for everybody but Bellingham. And I did talk to Tammy Bennett, who's working on getting us Bellingham's, but I think it'd be good to see if the warrant numbers have decreased since the jail restrictions have been lifted, or if they've stayed the same, to see if we're getting more or less charges on individuals that were out that we're just kind of giving everybody a lovely finger as law enforcement was passing by them because they knew there wasn't really any consequences, and now some of them are being picked up trying to resolve some of those cases. Other things that we might want to keep in mind is, I think it's House Bill 1252 that's back in committees, and that is basically legislation is looking at whether or not judges should have more information on whether an individual should be held longer or on higher bail due to eluding. And then there's other bills that are basically saying we should be looking at least restrictive means. So they're kind of competing bills on that and how that's going to affect our cases. I don't know, Maya, on the other thing that we want to keep in mind is we've been discussing it for the last year is the public defense caseload standards. And that will also impact incarceration and how cases are being handled. And I believe that the public comment ends at the end of April. Am I wrong on that, or do you know?
I think the public comment on those is over, but the Supreme Court is still just deliberating over what they're going to do. The Council on Public Defense, which is the Bar Association's agency, is going to be voting at their meeting on the April 18th to whether or not there's going to be any recommendation to delay implementation of the bar standards until the Supreme Court makes an announcement about adoption of any rule. And I don't know, you know, so the bar standards are set to go into effect on July 1st of this year, but the bar standards are not, there's no enforcement mechanism for them, and our local ordinance refers to them as advisory and sort of more aspirational, whereas the court rule is what we have to follow. So, I mean, like, it really, we have no sense from the court when they're gonna come out with their pronouncement. They just really aren't giving us any idea. So there's a heated debate in the Council of Public Defense whether or not to suggest a delay until this court speaks, and I just won't know the answer to that until later this month. But I mean, it's really still hinging on the decision from the Supreme Court, and they do what they do when they do it. So,
Maya, is there any discussion in the legislature or any placeholder in the budget to even?
no, it's not looking good. The Senate budget gave an additional 10 million in funding to the Office of Public Defense to send out in 10101 funds to the counties, and that distribution, I want to say, would allow for a couple more attorneys in Whatcom County, maybe 2 to 2.5 kind of is what it looked like. If that survives, the House budget had no increase in budget at all. And I did see that I think the Wasack lawsuit is going up to the Court of Appeals again on the issue of standing, and they're arguing that, that they do have standing to challenge. So there's still, things are still moving, but just very slowly. And the funding, I mean, the fact that even there was 10 million in the Senate budget was really remarkable, that it even got that far, since given sort of the general state of budget affairs. So we'll see if that sticks around.
Thank you, Maya. Any other comments, concerns, questions, thought about number 5? There's silence. I think we need some more data. When I was reading this, how can the court resolution efficiency be done better? I see having consistent counsel on both prosecution and defense as an imperative function. I mean, if caseloads go down, we still are going to have to find defense attorneys. And every time you switch a prosecutor or you switch a public defender, the case time usually starts over, and it takes a lot of time to go through all of that. And so I think we have to keep that in mind, to try to make sure that there's consistency in counsel. But we are at the end of the hour, and I want to make sure everybody has time to speak if there's other business or public comment.
Would you like me to call for public comment right now, Raylene?
Yes, please.
We have 3 attendees, and if you would like to speak, please virtually raise your hand now. I do have one raised hand. Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Dean White, and as I think most of you know, I'm managing the contract with Village Reach for development of the performance measurement and evaluation plan. And one of the important questions that our consultant is asking is to get input on definitions. I was intrigued by your discussion about the many variables going into recidivism as a definition. And I'm just wondering whether there's been an opportunity for Julia Garrett, who's the consultant, to talk with you, particularly Raylene, about getting your input on the definitions that are important. Has she reached out to you? Have you had a chance to meet with her?
I have not had a chance to meet with her, but I would be happy to do so.
Okay. And then Caleb, I think she met with you last week. Was there any, what's your sense of, how that conversation went in terms of getting some answers for her about the importance, of various definitions, recidivism or otherwise?
Yeah, I think that we came to good resolution on those. And as I mentioned earlier, it comes down to what we can actually do right now. And that's why I'm narrowly defining our scope of recidivism as a reincarceration within a given period of time, easy marker being 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. And that we can specifically quantify, and we can actually take that and translate that into ones and zeros. Like if somebody had a release date in 2014 and within 1 year of that release date, they had a new incarceration, that's a 1. If it's not, then it's a 0, and you count the number of ones and the number of total zeros, and then as a percentage express those two. So to me, that is a metric that we can use as long as we're specifically defining what we're tracking and how we're tracking it. I think that makes good sense as a starting place. And again, it's important to Stephen's point earlier to further that conversation and say that there are other things that we should be considering in the conversation. But we've got to be able to do something, and just simply having no answer moving forward is not the answer.
Good. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. Is there any other public comment?
No more hands are raised, and I don't see anyone in our conference room. And I would ask Stephen and Bertie if you have a minute to chat after the meeting, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Well, I think this was actually a very productive meeting and I appreciate everybody's input. It's actually 12:28, so you get 2 minutes of your lunch hour back. Yay! Thank you and have a great afternoon.